Captain America Super Soldier is a strange game. Released in 2011, the same year as the first Captain America movie, it seemed to pass many people by. The MCU hadn't properly gotten underway and the game itself released to average reviews. I've always wanted to play the game, but always found other more important games or projects getting in the way. Well, after watching a ton of Mitten Squad, VG Myths and Nathaniel Bandy, the links to all those channels will be in the description, I decided to give Captain America Super Soldier a go, under one very important condition. That condition was that I could only use Cap's iconic shield to beat the game. That means no punching, no kicking, no turrets, and no special abilities that didn't solely rely on Cap's shield. For this playthrough, I decided to select the normal difficulty, but I reserve the right to change if things get tough. So join me today as we ask if you can beat Captain America Super Soldier on the Xbox 360 using only Cap's shield. So the first level is a prologue which sees you in the trenches in World War II. Our first encounter with some HYDRA baddies encourages us to take them out using the X button, something that we obviously can't do. Instead, we take aim with our shield and dispatch the first of many HYDRA soldiers. Straight away, aiming with the left trigger felt slow and clunky, making me nervous for the outcome of this run. Despite my concerns over Cap's agility when wielding the shield, I persevered to the end of the level where we encountered our very first mini-boss. The Scorcher is an enemy that fires mortar-like projectiles at Cap, causing pretty big splash damage. I found that using the aiming and throw technique to be far too slow to deal with the Scorcher, so instead I opted for the faster but less accurate quickfire throw. My first attempt ended in failure. I hadn't quite got the rhythm of when to dodge and when to throw. The next attempt proved far easier, as I managed to back him up enough, meaning that he barely fired at me, resulting in an easy win. So after the prologue, we're off to a German occupied village now in search of Dr. Armin Zola. We make our way through the level using a combination of the quick throw to down enemies and then a targeted throw to finish them off while they're on the ground. After hacking a door, which is simply matching a number or letter from the left side of the screen to a number or letter on the right side of the screen, we get to pick our first upgrade. The upgrade system in this game is actually pretty unique. Hitting high combos rewards you with points to upgrade Cap's moves, but you also get a fair amount of points from finding the game's collectibles, and the game has a lot of collectibles. As we're restricting ourselves using just our shield, our chances of getting high combos and amassing loads of points are pretty slim, so relying on collectibles is probably our best bet. I won't be using a guide for them, but I will try and pick up as many as I can. So the first upgrade I chose was the Shield Slam, which was next to useless. For a start, you have to charge it up first, which leaves you vulnerable, and the payoff is a shockwave attack that knocks enemies back. I must have used this move no more than 20 times, at most during this playthrough. It was that poor. The next problem I encountered was enemies with guns. You see, when my shield is hurtling towards an enemy's face, I leave myself open to gunfire. Of course, I can spam the A button and leap around to avoid bullets, but it's still another issue we must face. Anyway, after defeating the gun-toting enemies, we call HQ and finish the first level. Chapter 2 begins with us being swarmed by HYDRA forces. I take a couple of shots as I try to adapt to gun-wielding enemies, but we soon make short work of the ambush. As we progress further into the level, we have our first encounter with enemies that carry shields. Luckily, they don't have the Cap skills, and we soon finish them off using our quick fire to down them and aim to finish them off technique. It's also in this level that we meet our first group of snipers. Luckily, we can deflect their bullets straight back at them using our shield. After taking out the snipers, we need to do some very basic platforming, and that's Chapter 2 complete. Chapter 3 continues in the same vein as Chapter 2, though I made a pretty big discovery. If you aim your shield, you can highlight several enemies and take them all out in one throw. Each enemy targeted consumes 1 bar of focus, so best to use it in a pinch, but this method comes in really handy later in the game. So I'm starting to get more comfortable with Cap's movement now. I found out that blocking is best served for gunfire only. If we're allowed to punch or kick, then a well-timed block leaves a short window for a counter-attack, but seeing as we're shield only, the best form of defense against unarmed enemies is our dodge move, which seems pretty OP. Our next roadblock comes in the form of a barn. Taking out the enemies outside of the barn was simple enough, but when we head inside, the game seemed to want us to use the turret. Luckily, you can ignore the turret and jump down to defeat the enemies with your shield. It was at this point that we unlocked our second upgrade, the Ricochet Shield. This allows us to bounce our shield on up to 3 targets, which is pretty handy. Next up is another Scorcher, you know, the guy we fought at the end of the prologue. Again, quick throws to stun him backwards are the way forward here. Just seconds later, we face another Scorcher. This time, we back him up into a corner and just spam our shield at him. After the second Scorcher, you can run past most enemies and make it to the end of Chapter 3. Chapter 4 was a pretty unremarkable chapter. In fact, it was incredibly short. It also introduced the ability to weaponize enemies, something which we aren't allowed to do. Moving on. Chapter 5 is our first major boss fight of the run against Baron von Strucker. After using our patented spam and dodge maneuvers, we managed to drop the Baron to his knees, and this is where we had our first problem. When a boss is dropped to their knees, you aren't able to do any more damage with your shield. The only way to progress the game is to pick him up and smash the X button, which leads you to punching him. I tried loads of different angles and throws to damage the Baron, but I had no luck. You have to pick him up and punch him in a QuickTime event. Now, if I'm honest, I'm not sure if this breaks the run or not. QTEs are almost like cutscenes where you have no control, so I'd argue that it wasn't me who hit the Baron. Listen, I'm clutching at straws here, so let me know what you think. Just to rub salt into the wound, after defeating the Baron, he comes back for one last fight, which means you have to do the QTE to beat him again. After beating him the second time, we finish a very tricky Chapter 5. On to Chapter 6 now, and I immediately had my doubts. The end of Chapter 5 saw Cap captured by Zola and Madam Hydra, who removed Cap's utility belt and took his shield. Considering I needed the shield to take out enemies, I was pretty worried. Fortunately, the first part of this chapter requires platforming and not much else. Then the guards came. My first idea was to try and get the guards to kill themselves by falling off the bridge, but that was a bust as it seemed to be surrounded by an invisible wall. My next idea was far more successful. I tried to get the guards to hit each other. This took forever and I died countless times trying it, but I finally managed to whittle down the group of enemies to just the one Hydra bad guy. The trouble is, how do I kill this one? I tried blowing up computers with my fists, hoping the explosions would take the guards out. I'm not sure if this would have counted, but it doesn't matter, it didn't work anyway. So that means that for the first time in this playthrough, I had to throw a kick. Things didn't get easier in the next room as we had to fight this guy. Again, without a shield, there wasn't much we could do here, and in the end I was once again forced to use my mitts. In total, I had to take out 25 enemies, which is pretty frustrating. It's one of those annoying parts in games where you have to defeat the enemies before you can progress. Luckily, after defeating those Hydra guys, we finally have our shield back.
That's better. They'll make it without this.
Me too, Cap. Me too. The rest of Chapter 6 was pretty straightforward now that we were reunited with our shield. So the answer to the title of this video is no, you cannot complete Captain America Super Soldier using only Cap's shield. Still, we won't stop there, let's keep going to see how many more baddies need to fall by Cap's hands, if any at all. Chapter 7 was a pretty standard chapter up until a point where we needed to defend Bucky and a group of prisoners trying to leave the castle. We need to man a turret and kill the Scorchers and guards trying to take out Bucky's train. I tried just leaving the train and hoped that the video game gods would grant it safe passage, and I thought I was onto something until it blew up just before the end. I had no way of getting down to dish out justice myself, so I had no choice but to man the turret and take out the Hydra soldiers. So that's chapters 6 and 7 where we've had to defeat enemies using a method other than our shield. Let's hope chapter 8 is kinder to us. At the beginning of chapter 8 we have to climb this ladder.
I give my life, not for honor, but for you.
Chapter 8 also introduces us to the Screamers. My first few encounters with these guys were rough. They can catch your shield and throw it away, leaving you defenseless. Their ranged attacks take off a huge chunk of damage, and if you get in close they can levitate you before throwing you away. In the end I managed to deflect a few of the Screamer's shots to down its shields and attack it from the back to take down the first of many Screamers. I'd actually found a really easy way to beat the Screamers, I just didn't know it yet. This is by far the most difficult chapter, mainly due to the Screamers. One area in particular caused me real trouble. We had to rescue our friend Duggan, but to do that we needed to defeat 2 Screamers. After much trial and error and wondering why a shield to the back works so well on the first Screamer, I realised that to make short work of these major pains in my arse, you just needed to take their shields down and move in close to bash them with your shield. Simple. After saving Duggan, we had one final battle by an elevator before moving on to chapter 9. After the nightmare that was chapter 8, I'm happy to report that chapter 9 was far easier. So much easier in fact that my notes for this chapter read, bog standard chapter, nothing to know. Chapter 10 finally let us get our hands on Madam Hydra. Well, not our hands, but you get what I mean. As is the case with most bosses in Captain America Super Soldier, the fights are split into 3 sections. The first section was very easy, deflect Hydra's bullets while taking out any goons that tried to help. The second phase was a little trickier. Madam Hydra will always dodge your shield, so you have to rely on her shooting you with a shot that can be deflected. The trouble is, every shot she was taking was a shot that I couldn't deflect. In the end I ran into the Madam, smashing the right trigger hoping to make contact with her to set off the third phase of the fight. I got extremely lucky somehow and damaged her just enough to move on to the final phase. The final section was even tougher, with multiple special enemies joining the fight, meaning I had to time my jumps and dodges perfectly. I died more than once here, but after a few tries we finally managed to take her down. Chapter 11 began with talk of a supposed air division, which had me slightly concerned, but other than a few battles with large groups of enemies, Chapter 11 was a breeze. The same can be said for Chapter 12, which saw the introduction of Red Skull. We upgraded our shield ricochet move to allow us to target 4 enemies before finishing another simple chapter. Chapter 13 saw a lot of platforming and not much else. Any enemies we did encounter were the easy type, so 13 was also a breeze. We're on a roll. Chapter 14 saw the difficulty increase dramatically. Not only did we face the hardest boss in the game again,
I give my life, not for honor,
but we also had to defeat Iron Cross. When I first threw my shield at Iron Cross and saw how little damage it did, I was worried, but with repeated spamming and dodging, we managed to take Cross down to his knees. The next part of the fight was more of the same, though this time we had to deal with Red Skull firing explosives at us. Again, dodging and spamming the shield worked like a charm here. Also, we weren't required to move in close and perform a QTE to defeat Cross, so that's a bonus. Chapter 15 saw the return of the Screamers, who caused us a lot of trouble earlier on. With our newfound method of deflecting 3 shots to remove their shields before moving in close to give them a whack, they proved to be no problem. We then had to fight a helicopter. The game wanted us to use a turret, but using the focus bars while aiming at the chopper did large chunks of damage, and we were soon able to take it down. The final battle at the end of this level was a little tricky, but only because at this point in the game I was getting pretty cocky. Chapter 16 was a pretty simple level, though there was a part where I had to take down 2 tanks. I was worried I'd have to use a turret again, but luckily I called in an airstrike instead. Chapter 17 had us come face to face with a robot controlled by Dr. Zola. I found the best way to deal with Zola was to use the charged aim throw, which dealt huge damage to him. As with most bosses in the game, when you've depleted a health bar enough, you have to move in for the kill. Luckily on the Zola robots, we actually smashed their screens with our shields, so I'm counting that as a shield kill. Chapter 18 is the final chapter in the game, and chucks loads of Zola robots at you before having you do battle with a robot called the Sleeper. Despite being the climax of the game, this was actually a pretty straightforward level requiring pretty simple shield usage. After defeating the Sleeper robot, you'll have completed Captain America Super Soldier. So we failed in our attempt to complete the game with just a shield, but aside from the section where our shield was taken, we managed to get through the game without too many problems. Overall, the game itself is pretty decent. I've seen many compare it to the Arkham games, and whilst it doesn't come close to that series, it's still a pretty decent, if pretty short, playthrough. So that's it for today's video. If you enjoyed, then a like is really appreciated. I hope you like these new videos. If you want to see more, then be sure to let me know. Thank you all for watching, and I'll speak to you all soon.